The political firefight over the payroll tax cut extension is front and center today. The House will convene in hopes of approving a 2-month extension by unanimous vote. Now, throughout this process, President Obama and other Democrats said the House Republicans were holding hard-working Americans hostage. Meanwhile, Republicans were adamant about extending the cuts for a full year rather than just 2 months. So what's the real political agenda here? Joe Krier, president of Krier Wealth Management, to talk about the issues today. I think there's little doubt that they'll get the unanimous consent that they want today. But what's really interesting is this has gotten so many headlines because people were sitting back and saying, ooh, I'm going to have to pay more taxes next year. But there are so many other issues behind this that are politically motivated that they've got to understand them as well.
Yeah, and the dynamics around this almost completely are just encasing what politics are going to look like in 2012. And don't forget, this is a temporary tax holiday, as they call it. So it wasn't like a tax cut or legislative changes. All it was a break, and it was intended to expire already. And the hopes that the economy was going to be picking up and everybody would be okay absorbing the bigger taxes. So here we are, still in a sluggish economy and a political firestorm just raging right now.
And both the GOP and the Dems are mindful of the fact that what they do and how they tread is going to have an impact on the elections. The first caucus is January 3rd. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out in the run for the White House.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think Obama was relishing in the fact that the Republicans were actually fighting for a tax cut here. They were going for 12 months versus 2 months, and they're complaining about kicking the can down the road. Well, it doesn't really matter. Either way, you're kicking the can down the road, whether it's 2 or 12. But it's, in my mind, it's setting this thing up for the end of the year next year when we're in the heat of the presidential election and we've got just a massive amount of legislation that's going to have to be worked out.
I was going to say, this is like in a boxing match. You've got one fighter who's positioning and doing a little rope-a-dope, trying to get in the spot where he can go in for the kill. When you compare dollars to donuts here, the amount of dollars when you're talking about this whole payroll tax cut issue and what's coming down the pike, I mean, it's peanuts.
Yeah, it's 200 billion versus 5.2 trillion, and none of what's coming down the line is good for taxpayers. Everything on that list right there is pain. If the Bush-era income tax cuts expire, everyone pays higher income tax. Debt limit debate, well, that's when government almost shut down and plenty of people were about laid off. Mandatory spending cuts, which were the result of the last budget debt ceiling debate, are going to kick in one way or another. So we're going to have higher taxes and lower spending by the feds, none of which make taxpayers happy, both of which are probably good for the U.S. long term, but it's going to be ugly stuff happening right at the time when we're all trying to decide who the next president's going to be.
What kind of impact is it going to have on the economy? Obviously, you believe that long term it's what we need to do, but in the short term, is it basically the old cliche, short-term pain for long-term gain?
Yeah, and everyone is hoping here that these type of tax holidays and things are enough to just get the fire lit. They want to get the economy going, and when the economy is rolling along, it's an awful lot easier to layer new taxes onto taxpayers or mix spending cuts in so those people can leave the public sector and get a job, at a small business somewhere. But right now we're still kind of stuck on go, and everybody's got their fingers crossed that maybe by February, by the time this payroll thing comes up, the economy is showing some real strong signs of life, and then they can go ahead and let it expire. They don't have to add on another 10 months. Everybody's sitting back and watching this.
But if the economy doesn't start to mend even further, then the politicians could have their back up against the wall, and we'll see what they do if presidential politics wins out over the reality check they need. 721, Joe Krier. Merry Christmas. Thanks for being here. Always appreciate your perspective.